Hello and welcome to Reading Together from Sea Harp Press. I'm Eugene Lunning, co-founder of Sea Harp, and today we'll be continuing our journey through C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters. This is a HarperCollins title, but if you're fascinated with Lewis like we are, take a look at a couple of our mini documentaries on the spiritual formation of Lewis, and we have some interesting original audio content direct from Lewis. Or, if you want to read Lewis, you could take a look at the foreword to Athanasius's On the Incarnation, which is one of our Timeless series editions. Well, without any further ado, let's dive in. This is Screwtape Letters, letter number 10. My dear Wormwood, I was delighted to hear from Trip Tweets, that's a great name, Trip Tweets, that your patient has made some very desirable new acquaintances, and that you seem to have used this event in a really promising manner. I gather that the middle-aged married couple who called at his office are just the sort of people we want him to know. Rich, smart, superficially intellectual, and brightly skeptical about everything in the world. I gather they are even vaguely pacifist, not on moral grounds, but from an ingrained habit of belittling anything that concerns the great mass of their fellow men, and from a dash of purely fashionable and literary communism. This is excellent. And you seem to have made good use of all his social, sexual, and intellectual vanity. Tell me more. Did he commit himself deeply? I don't mean the words. There is a subtle play of looks and tones and laughs by which a mortal can imply that he is of the same party as those to whom he is speaking. That is the kind of betrayal you should specially encourage, because the man does not fully realize it himself. And by the time he does, you will have made withdrawal difficult. It's interesting as we look at this opening of this particular letter. It's going to be based on his interaction with this couple who are perhaps a little older than him, but have this sort of world weariness, this, as he says, skepticism. But friend, do you ever think about what skepticism is? Like, do you know anything about it as like an intellectual practice? Well, the actual original skeptical philosopher was known as Pyrrho. And basically the idea behind skepticism, I'll put my book down for a second, is that it's as if you have two states of being or two worldviews, and you're holding them in your hands, and you really refuse to take a position. It's neither this nor this. It's just sort of a waiting between the two and a choice not to actually make a decision. That really is the nature of skepticism. As Lewis is going to talk about, and as I want to just tell you in the spirit of Jesus, all of life is in fact a choice. So we cannot hold in tension two poles of human experience and think that by just sort of holding them there, we're going to live at all. Life involves choice. We have to choose. We have to decide who we want to be and how we want to go about being that way. So as we delve into this skeptical couple, I want to remind you that we do not follow Pyrrho of old. We follow Jesus. Jesus who is himself the way. We choose to go on that way. And then in every single day, we make choices to continue to follow on that way. Let's continue. No doubt, he must very soon realize that his own faith is in direct opposition to the assumptions on which all the conversation of his new friends is based. I don't think that matters much, provided that you can persuade him to postpone any open acknowledgement of the fact, and this, with the aid of shame, pride, modesty, and vanity, will be easy to do. As long as the postponement lasts, he will be in a false position. He will be silent when he ought to speak, and laugh when he ought to be silent. He will assume, at first only by his manner, but presently by his words, all sorts of cynical and skeptical attitudes which are not really his. But if you play him well, they may become his. All mortals tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. This is elementary. The real question is how to prepare for the enemy, meaning God's, counterattack. Boy, friends, I am given pause. I don't remember this line, but boy, is it good. All mortals tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. I remember years ago, I'm sure many of you have read the works of John Eldredge. I remember that there was a Latin phrase in one of his books, esse quam videre, I think is how you would say it, which means to be rather than to appear. And that was sort of the nature of what Eldredge was trying to get across. Like, it is for us to actually be rather than to appear to be. That's what we're talking about here. I love that. All mortals tend to turn into the thing they are pretending to be. I think you and I can agree that we often go through life filling up our days with all kinds of pretense, acting a certain way that we kind of know deep down we're not. But I love this delineation that we are actually called not to be silent when we're supposed to speak, not to laugh when we should have been silent. Friends, you and I are trying to follow Jesus. We don't need to be brash about it. Like, we don't need to meet with people and just throw it in their face. But we don't want to pretend that we're not doing what we're doing. We're following that wonderful man. Other people, quite frankly, are just following the whim of the day. So let's be a little bit excited about the fact that we have not only a philosophy of life, but an actual spiritual way of being that we're meant to actually offer to others, to show them by our lives that it's true, robust, exciting. Let's not pretend. I love that line. The first thing is to delay as long as possible the moment at which he realizes this new pleasure as a temptation. Since the enemy, again, meaning God's servants, have been preaching about the world as one of the great standard temptations for 2,000 years, this might seem difficult to do. But fortunately, they have said very little about it for the last few decades. And again, this was being written back in the 40s, so imagine the change since then. In modern Christian writings, though I see much, indeed more than I like, about mammon, I see few of the old warnings about worldly vanities, the choice of friends, and the value of time. All that your patient would probably classify as Puritanism, and may I remark in passing that the value we have given to that word is one of the really solid triumphs of the last 100 years. By it, we rescue annually thousands of humans from temperance, chastity, and sobriety of life. Let's pause for a second and talk about some of those terms, because I think even in the last 70, 80 years, we've even lost some context for what Lewis is talking about. So first and foremost, mammon. Mammon is not just something that's said in the Sermon on the Mount. You know, you cannot live both with God and with mammon. That's not just another word for money and possessions. Mammon was actually a Syriac god that really people were like, no, that's a real evil force that is attached to money, wealth, possessions, all of these things. So yeah, we don't talk about mammon a lot anymore. But if you look at the Greek, that is actually what Jesus says. You cannot serve both God and mammon. So that's the first one. Then worldly vanities, and he capitalizes these words. You know, when you think about back when he's writing Church of England, kind of middle of the 20th century, yeah, they were not talking as much. We are certainly not talking about as much about the vanities of the world. And for there, I would go to Ecclesiastes, the writings of Solomon. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Pointing out the meaninglessness of attaching our identity, our personal self-worth, to the passing fancies of the world around us. And then, of course, the choice of friends. This idea that good company actually like raises the level of our moral system. Bad company corrupts it. And finally, that value of time. I wonder if you and I, in the midst of this very time-conscious age, actually are conscious at all of the way we spend time. Friends, I've already talked about this. We're going to be going here, especially in chapter 15 of Screwtape Letters. But time, the present, like the contemporaneous experience of what eternity is trying to do in breaking through today. This is so important to Lewis, to his theology of life. It was deeply important to Augustine, say. The idea of how do we possess our lives? How do we live in the present so that they have eternal value? Last thing I'll say, Puritanism. You and I, probably you're watching, you might be an American. We think of the Puritans as those who came over on the Mayflower. But in England in the 1940s, Puritanism was basically an aspersion cast at anything that was a little too religious. If it seemed like it was even verging toward legalism, then people would say, the Puritanism. So those are some of the terms that Lewis is having Screwtape kind of jokingly throw out there, just to give you a little context. I'll continue to read. Sooner or later, however, the real nature of his new friends must become clear to him, and then your tactics must depend on the patient's intelligence. If he is a big enough fool, you can get him to realize the character of the friends only while they are absent. Their presence can be made to sweep away all criticism. If this succeeds, he can be induced to live, as I have known many humans live, for quite long periods, 2 parallel lives. He will not only appear to be, but actually be a different man in each of the circles he frequents. Failing this, there is a subtler and more entertaining method. He can be made to take a positive pleasure in the perception that the 2 sides of his life are inconsistent. This is done by exploiting his vanity. He can be taught to enjoy kneeling beside the grocer on Sunday just because he remembers that the grocer could not possibly understand the urbane and mocking world which he inhabited on Saturday evening, and contrariwise, to enjoy the bawdy and blasphemy over the coffee with these admirable friends all the more because he is aware of a deeper spiritual world within him which they cannot understand. You see the idea. The worldly friends touch him on one side and the grocer on the other, and he is the complete, balanced, complex man who sees round them all. Thus, while being permanently treacherous to at least 2 sets of people, he will feel, instead of shame, a continual undercurrent of self-satisfaction. Finally, if all else fails, you can persuade him in defiance of conscience to continue the new acquaintance on the ground that he is, in some unspecified way, doing these people good by the mere fact of drinking their cocktails and laughing at their jokes, and that to cease to do so would be priggish, intolerant, and, of course, puritanical. I already kind of shared with you that thought that occurred to me as I was reading before of Eldridge's Esse Quam Videre. I'm back there again. It's a question that I would love to challenge you with. I'm going to ask it of myself. Who is it that I want to be? Who do you want to be? When I think of those first friends of Jesus, when he walked into their reality, they had the identities they had. So Peter, James, John, Andrew, let's look at them. They were fishermen, men of the Galilee. They were tough. They knew all the right spots. They understood the seasons, the waters, the storms that would blow through. They had this sense of self into which Jesus walked and said, "Follow me." In that split second, they were not being asked to become a Christian fisherman. They were being asked to become a disciple and eventually an apostle of Jesus himself. They didn't lose their abilities out on the water. They continued to sail with Jesus, and I'm sure occasionally to throw out a net. We see them doing that in John 21. But for the rest of their lives, all they were followers of Jesus. Everything else was nothing. As Lewis, through the mouth of Screwtape, is pointing out to us, oftentimes we like to think of ourselves as 2 or who knows, even 3 or 4 track people. We segment our lives into work, play, even sometimes sort of that, well, I'm a more philosophical Christian in this context and more of like a service Christian over here. I'm a little bit holier with these people over here and I'm a little looser over here. Friends, I place before you the image of Jesus walking up to you every single morning and saying, "Follow me." Do you think that we could follow him being two-faced? Do you think that we can pretend to be a certain way over here and then turn around and he's gazing upon us and not feel a little sense of shame? And that's not a religious sense of shame. It's that shame you feel when you get caught out by a dear friend. So as we get ready to finish this particular letter, I would just ask again, who do you want to be? Who do you want your children to see you being? Do you want that everyone around you would just come alive in being near to the Jesus who lives in you? I mean, frankly, that's what I want. I think you do too. So let's take these words to heart. And here we are, short final paragraph. Let's finish this letter. Meanwhile, you will, of course, take the obvious precaution of seeing that this new development induces him to spend more than he can afford and to neglect his work and his mother. Her jealousy and alarm and his increasing evasiveness or rudeness will be invaluable for the aggravation of the domestic tension. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. And friends, I just named it a second ago, but I'll do it again. As we endeavor to follow Jesus with this particular day of our human life, there is no place that it will matter more than in the relationships that are closest to us. I've asked you before, and I'll ask you again. How does your spouse or significant other, how do your children, or if you don't have children, your closest friends, how do they receive Jesus through being around you in the day-by-day, humdrum, normal things of life? Is he sparkling as he shows himself through you? Or is there a little part of us that kind of tucks him away as we go about our life? There is nothing more joyous, there is nothing higher or better for you than to be who he's called you to be in himself, to rise to each day, to spend time with him, to get frankly carried away by his goodness over you, and then to carry it proudly. I've often pictured it to you, I think, almost like this flame burning within us, to carry it every place we go, to let it be the light that he is, and to show everybody that we are overjoyed to be the disciples, and again, those ones called to be apostles of him. Friends, thanks for joining me on another episode of Reading Together. We've been in C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, and I really appreciate this day-by-day thing we're doing together. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I also hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I look forward to our next episode.